This week we're going to revisit the performance strength of resilience, and this presentation is adapted from the work of Elena Aguilar. Please close your eyes for just a moment and imagine that this is happening to you. Imagine it's the end of a rainy Friday when kids didn't get time outside and you had to supervise indoor recess. You ended up having only 10 minutes for lunch, during which you inhaled a bag of chips and a soda. During the final few minutes of cleanup, a student who often pushes your buttons says something disrespectful to you. You had simply asked the student to pick up a piece of trash. The other kids stare, giggle, and watch to see what you will do. Freeze this scene in your mind and pause for a moment and write a response to this question in your journal. What would you do? Please close your eyes for just a moment and imagine that this is happening to you. Imagine it's the end of a rainy Friday when kids didn't get time outside and you had to supervise indoor recess. You ended up having only 10 minutes for lunch, during which you inhaled a bag of chips and a soda. During the final few minutes of cleanup, a student who often pushes your buttons says something disrespectful to you. You had simply asked the student to pick up a piece of trash. The other kids stare, giggle, and watch to see what you will do. Freeze this scene in your mind and pause for a moment and write a response to this question in your journal. What would you do? This is the moment between something that happens and how we respond. It's the moment where we can really cultivate resilience. There's a famous quote from an unknown origin that says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. That response has the potential for our growth and the cultivation of resilience. Each of us has tremendous power in how we interpret what happens, and therefore how we respond to incidents, large and small. The opportunity for resilience originates in how we make sense of the things that happen in our daily lives. The opportunity for resilience lies in how we make sense of things that happen. These interpretations dictate our actions. There are many ways to interpret a student's disrespectful comment, such as the scenario you visualized. Each interpretation will lead us to act in a different way. Each of those actions will have intended and unintended consequences. There will be ripples of impact on ourselves, on our class, on our relationships with individual students. Aguilar suggests that we all enter the field of education so that we can have a positive impact on young people. She believes that by cultivating resilience, we can fulfill those intentions and perhaps offer students more stability, continuity, and serve as role models for managing the inevitable challenges that life brings to each of us. On this slide, you can see that there are ways that we know we can increase our resilience. We know it can be increased through adaptive behaviors. We know that it's connected to our circumstances. We know that there are neurobiological underpinnings of emotional resilience. We actually may be born with a certain amount of resilience. And a substantial amount of our ability to be resilient is actually coming from our daily habits. Simply stated, resilience is how we weather the storms in our lives and rebound after difficult experiences. There is a wide variation in the ways people respond to adversity. Some overcome unbelievable hardships and thrive, while others may live their lives completely derailed. Various mechanisms in our body, specifically in our brains, work in concert to make us more or less resilient across our lifespans. Some researchers believe that our genetic makeup may even play a role. However, we do know that we can build resilience by strengthening our daily habits. In essence, resilience is a way of being that allows us to bounce back quickly from adversity, stronger than we were before. It's an adaptive and dynamic process that includes an individual's interactions over time in a complex environment. Context, we know, plays a significant role. Who we are, where we are, all impact our ability to cultivate resilience. And cultivating resilience through engaging in specific habits and fostering specific dispositions can be powerful. Resilience really is what enables us to flourish and to thrive. Regardless of whether you work in an established, well-resourced school or an underfunded school in an underserved community, our work as educators is emotional and stressful. It is the nature of being in a helping profession. Now, healthy stress can be okay. It can challenge us and actually help us to develop. However, now more than ever, many of us are facing toxic stress in our schools. Toxic stress occurs when demands consistently outpace our ability to cope. Roughly 500,000 U.S. educators leave the profession every year, a turnover rate in excess of 20%. Attrition rates among first-year teachers has increased by approximately 40% over the last few decades. And the headlines suggest that the number will be much higher due to the recent COVID-19 paradigm. It would seem that school leaders of all types and all levels need to focus on boosting the resilience of staff if they are to succeed in transforming schools into a place of nurturing and positive cultures. School leaders, regardless of the level at which they work, need to pay attention to these attrition factors. It's estimated that teacher turnover costs school districts upwards of $2.2 billion per year, and the cost of replacing a teacher, for instance, in an urban district exceeds $20,000 per teacher. Lack of resilience has a real financial cost. It also contributes to staff instability, which in turn negatively impacts student learning. Higher turnover rates for faculty and administration make it hard to accumulate professional capital. It hinders the implementation of programs. It contributes to low levels of trusts, and it certainly makes the culture fragile. It just would seem that it makes good sense from both a financial and cultural perspective to focus on increasing the resilience of all of the people who work in our schools. Dr. Aguilar suggests, and I agree, that the end goal is not just to retain warm bodies in classrooms, but to meet the needs of our students. All children deserve to feel they belong to a resilient community, that they can graduate, that they can be eligible for college and career of their choice, and that they will be allowed to contribute to society. So we know that they deserve passionate, effective, and committed educators. We need to ensure that we're working and leading in every organization at every level, that every child can really thrive academically, socially, and emotionally. We need to be supporting the growth and the development of the whole child. Over the past decade, there's been an increase in attention to the social and emotional learning needs of students. Curricula and standards have been developed, resources have been allocated, staff have been trained, and all in all, we've made some tremendous advancements in acknowledging that our students are complex and multifaceted human beings. Increasingly, schools have committed to guiding students in the acquisition of skill sets to help them live flourishing lives. And of course, this recent COVID-19 paradigm has brought the importance of SEL to the forefront. So perhaps now we need to also turn our attention to the adults working in and with schools through the same lens. Ideally, what we need right now is not necessarily more professional development on standards, academic discourse, or even data, but perhaps providing time and space and attention to managing stress and cultivating resilience. Perhaps if we focus on cultivating our own resilience, it will help us to manage physical and emotional stressors. It will help us to enjoy life and perhaps fulfill our original purpose, our why as educators. Dr. Elena Aguilar suggests that there are 3 conversations in which we need to simultaneously engage to consider how cultivating resilience can potentially transform our schools. First of all, individual resilience. Aguilar believes that we can do a lot to boost our own individual resilience, improve our well-being, and prevent burnout. Ultimately, we have control over what we think, how we engage with our emotions, and the actions we take every day to cultivate resilience. Also, in terms of organizational conditions, she posits that fostering on individual well-being alone will not suffice. So if the conditions and the context in which we work are not optimal, then it's not enough to say, sleep more, check your attitude, or be grateful. And to be honest, the conditions in many schools and districts don't foster well-being. Some of these conditions can, include the adult culture or the strength of the leadership or the basic routines and systems. To address burnout and turnover, leaders and organizations need to take a responsibility for substantially improving the conditions in which people work. Otherwise, even educators with high levels of resilience will leave. In terms of systemic conditions, Aguilar states that we need to address the macro, political, and economic conditions of our teacher education system. These are broad: teacher pay, teacher and leader preparation, and the structural and systemic roots of dysfunction. For the purpose of our conversation here, we're going to focus basically on boosting individual resilience, starting with me, right? In her conceptual framework, Elena Aguilar anchors things in a four-part kind of resilience pie. She talks about first who we are, what do we start with, where we are, what's our context, what do we do, habits of resilient educators, and how we are, the dispositions of resilient educators. According to Aguilar's conceptual framework, a great deal of who we are is somewhat fixed. However, she posits that we can cultivate resilience through the deep understanding of the dimensions of who we are. This can help us to understand where we can influence or even change aspects of ourselves that we might otherwise have considered as fixed. Who we are includes genetics, personality traits, values and beliefs, aptitudes and strengths, socio-political identities, and even our psyche. Context matters a great deal, even though we may have a limited ability to change it or improve it. And context includes the circumstances and situation within we find ourselves. It's also the social, political, cultural, and economic context around us. And it's also our stage of life and phase of career. Now, who we are intersects in a number of ways with where we are in time and space. Our individual context includes personal life circumstances, such as whether we are parents caring for young children or perhaps living far from home. Then there's the professional context, which includes the nature and challenges in the school district or the organization within which we work. This context matters deeply. The socio-political, cultural, economic context in which we live can deeply influence our beliefs and ways of thinking. It also affects our resilience. These kinds of things are broad, could be school funding, education policies, shifting demographics. And finally, context also includes our career stage. At different stages, we deal with different factors that affect our resilience. Newer teachers struggle with feeling effective. Veteran teachers may struggle more with the challenges of staying motivated and committed. Elena Aguilar suggests that resilient educators effectively and regularly engage in 12 habits and demonstrate 12 dispositions. I'm going to ask you to download the Habits and Dispositions of Resilient Educators self-assessment located in this week's asynchronous module for presentations. You'll need to assess yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. This is a two-part private self-assessment. You're going to assess yourself first on habits on the left-hand side and then dispositions on the right-hand side. And after you've completed this, please go to your journal and jot down what, if anything, surprised you after completing this assessment. Are there any habits you can identify as growing edges? Are there any dispositions that you might identify as growing edges for you personally?